For some people with multi-site pain that resists every standard treatment, the trigger isn't inside their body at all, it's inside their building. Exposure to indoor mold can produce toxins that drive inflammation and disrupt the nervous system, and it's something almost no pain workup ever considers. Let me walk you through this carefully because it's an area where it pays to be both open-minded and rigorous. I'm Dr. Padda. We continue our exposome subseries with a topic I want to handle thoughtfully: indoor mold and the toxins it can produce called mycotoxins. There's genuine science here and also genuine debate. So I'll give you both the compelling mechanism and an honest accounting of where the evidence stands. Here's the setup. When buildings suffer water damage, leaks, flooding, chronic dampness, they can become host to mold growth. Certain molds produce compounds called mycotoxins, which are biologically active and can be neurotoxic and pro-inflammatory. People living or working in these water-damaged environments can be chronically exposed. Some clinicians describe a constellation of symptoms in susceptible exposed individuals under the term chronic inflammatory response syndrome, or CIRS. The core idea is that in certain people, ongoing exposure triggers a persistent dysregulated inflammatory response. Here's the proposed mechanism. Mycotoxins, being pro-inflammatory and neurotoxic, are thought to drive a chronic inflammatory state and to disrupt the body's regulatory systems, including, in the CIRS framework, the hypothalamic regulation of hormones and the endocrine system. The downstream picture described includes multi-site neuropathic pain in many locations at once, and a notable resistance to standard interventions. That last point is key. Patients in this category often don't respond to the usual dietary and metabolic approaches the way you'd expect, because there's an ongoing external inflammatory driver, the exposure, that hasn't been removed. As long as someone is still living in the exposure, you're treating against a tap that's still running. This leads to the most important practical principle. If a chronic environmental exposure is genuinely driving someone's inflammation, then no amount of treatment will fully succeed while the exposure continues. The first and most essential step is identifying and removing the source, addressing the water-damaged environment. This is why, for the right patient, environmental investigation matters. You have to turn off the tap before you can mop up the floor. For a patient who has tried everything and remained inexplicably, multisystemically unwell, the question, "Is there something in your environment?" is one worth asking, even though it's almost never asked. Now, let me be straight with you about the evidence, because honesty matters here. What's well established, mold and dampness in buildings are genuinely associated with respiratory and inflammatory health effects. That's recognized by mainstream public health bodies. What's well established, mycotoxins are biologically active and can be harmful. What's more debated, and still evolving, the specific CIRS framework and the full scope of multisystem illness attributed to mold remain areas of genuine scientific controversy. So, I hold this with appropriate humility, taking environmental exposure seriously as a potential contributor for the right patient, while being careful not to overstate what the science has definitively proven. Both of those commitments matter. So if you've been multisystemically unwell, with pain all over and no clear answers, and you've wondered whether something in your environment is involved, that's not a fringe or foolish thought. It's a thorough one. A good clinician stays curious about the whole picture, including where you live and work. At the same time, you deserve a clinician who investigates this rigorously rather than jumping to conclusions. You deserve both open-mindedness and rigor, and you shouldn't have to choose between being dismissed and being told an oversimplified story. So here's our approach, and it reflects exactly that balance. For the patient who's done everything and remains inexplicably multisystemically unwell, we're willing to consider environmental contributors like mold exposure that conventional pain care ignores entirely. Where it's warranted, we explore whether an environmental exposure may be driving the picture, and we recognize that removing an ongoing source is foundational. And we do this while staying grounded in evidence, supporting your body's inflammatory regulation, detoxification, and resilience with the comprehensive approach of this masterclass, without overpromising or chasing unproven certainties, thorough and honest both at once. That's the standard you deserve. Sometimes the missing factor is in your environment, and a good clinician stays both curious and rigorous about that. If you've been multisystemically unwell with no answers, let's look at the whole picture, honestly. Go to painmd.tv and take the first step. I'm Dr. Padda, open-minded, evidence-grounded, and on your side.